You're standing in a palace corridor, and the smell hits you first. Not perfume, not incense, something else. Something wrong. The marble floors are slick with something that isn't water, and you realize with creeping horror that the most powerful woman in the world hasn't bathed in 3 months. Not because she can't, because she won't. Because in her mind, washing away the filth means washing away her power. Her name is Isabella of Castile, and what the history books won't tell you is that her religious devotion went so far beyond piety that it crossed into something medieval physicians couldn't even diagnose. She believed that cleanliness was vanity, that soap was sinful, that the stench of her unwashed body was somehow holy. Her servants would beg her, literally beg her, to at least change her undergarments. She wore the same linen shift for months until it rotted off her body. And here's the part that makes your skin crawl. This wasn't considered madness. This was considered saintly. Other noble women started copying her. Suddenly, the Spanish court reeked like a plague pit, and everyone was pretending it was the smell of righteousness. But Isabella's filth devotion was nothing compared to what he created. Because when you normalize royal decay, when you make suffering fashionable, when you convince an entire aristocracy that their bodies are just meat prisons for their souls, you don't get enlightenment. You get something far worse. You get people who start experimenting with exactly how far they can push the human body before it breaks. And I'm not talking about flagellation or fasting. I'm talking about practices so vile that even the Inquisition looked the other way. Let me introduce you to the concept of mortification rooms. These were private chambers, usually in monasteries or noble estates, where the truly devoted would go to torture themselves for Christ. Sounds familiar, right? Monks with whips, hair shirts, the usual medieval self-harm. Except here's what the sanitized histories don't mention. These rooms had drainage systems, purpose-built channels carved into the stone floors to handle blood, urine, feces, and other fluids I won't name. Because the mortification wasn't just whipping yourself. It was sitting in a specially designed chair with spikes that penetrated just deep enough to hurt constantly, but not deep enough to kill. 12 hours, 24 hours. Some records suggest certain monks sat for days, and the drainage systems would slowly carry away everything their bodies expelled. The room would fill with flies. The infection would set in, and they would sit there, reciting prayers, genuinely believing that the more their flesh rotted, the closer they got to God. Now here's where it gets truly disturbing. The nobility started visiting these rooms, not to pray, to watch. Wealthy patrons would pay monasteries for the privilege of sitting behind a screen and observing these sessions of holy decay. It became entertainment. Aristocratic women would bring embroidery. Men would bring wine. They'd sit there, watching someone's body slowly fail, discussing theology and politics while a human being dissolved into sepsis 3 feet away. And the monks couldn't object because the money funded the monastery. The church couldn't object because technically nothing happening was against doctrine. And the victims, the ones sitting in those spiked chairs, couldn't object because they'd volunteered. They'd begged for the honor. This is the machine that Isabella's filth worship helped build. The idea that the body was so worthless, so inherently sinful, that destroying it became a spectator sport. And it spread. French monasteries adopted it. German nobles built private mortification chambers in their own estates. By the 1500s, there were guidebooks, actual written manuals on how to construct the perfect suffering room, what angles the spikes should be, how deep the drainage channels needed to be, what kind of stone wouldn't absorb too much blood. Some of these texts survive in monastery archives, tucked away in sections that researchers need special permission to access. They read like engineering documents, clinical, precise, describing human agony with the same detached language you'd use to build a bridge. And here's the detail that should keep you awake tonight. These rooms had windows. Small ones, up high, specifically positioned so that light would come in at certain hours. Because the architects realized that watching someone suffer in darkness was as effective as watching them suffer in golden afternoon sunlight. They wanted the aesthetics right. They wanted the shadows to fall correctly across the degrading flesh. They were designing environments for beautiful suffering, and people paid fortunes to experience it, either as participant or audience. Now, let me tell you about Marguerite of Navarre, a woman who took this entire concept and made it worse in ways that still make historians uncomfortable. She was royal, educated, politically powerful, everything Isabella was, but with a darker kind of creativity. Marguerite didn't just tolerate the mortification rooms. She innovated. She commissioned what she called sympathy chambers, where multiple people could suffer simultaneously while maintaining eye contact with each other. The psychological component was intentional. You weren't just enduring your own pain. You were watching someone else endure theirs. And you couldn't help them, couldn't comfort them, couldn't even look away, because the chairs were designed to keep your head immobilized. She believed this multiplied the spiritual benefit, that witnessing another's suffering while experiencing your own created some kind of divine resonance. And the French court loved it. Marguerite would host what she called evenings of contemplation, which were essentially torture parties. Nobles would arrive in their finest clothes, drink wine, discuss literature, and between courses, they'd rotate through the sympathy chambers for 15-minute sessions. Just long enough to hurt, not long enough to cause permanent damage. They'd emerge bleeding through their silk, return to the dinner table, and continue debating poetry. One visitor from the Venetian court wrote about attending one of these evenings, and his letter survives in the state archives. He describes watching a duchess and a cardinal sitting across from each other in the sympathy chamber, both impaled on their respective spike arrays, maintaining perfect aristocratic composure while blood pooled beneath their chairs. And then, he writes, they were helped out, bandaged by servants, and returned to the party where someone made a joke about the ordeal, and everyone laughed. He ends the letter by saying he'd never felt more disturbed by anything in his life, and he'd witnessed public executions. But Marguerite wasn't done innovating. She started experimenting with what she called purification fasting, which was starvation dressed up as spirituality. Except her version included forced vomiting. Participants would eat a meal, then be given herbs that induced violent purging. The logic was that you had to take sin into your body in order to expel it, that the act of vomiting was itself holy because you were rejecting physical sustenance. She wrote essays about this, actual philosophical treatises arguing that the body's revolt against food was proof of the soul's dominance. And people believed her. Noble women across France started this practice, eating and purging, until their teeth rotted from the stomach acid, until their throats bled, until some of them simply died from the damage. But they died thin, they died pale, they died looking like the suffering saints in church paintings. And their families buried them with honor, sometimes even pushing for sainthood, because their self-destruction had been so thoroughly disguised as devotion. The church investigated some of these cases, but here's the problem. How do you condemn someone for being too pious? How do you tell a grieving family that their daughter didn't die holy? She just died. So the investigations would quietly close. The practices would continue, and the machine kept running, kept finding new ways to make suffering fashionable, kept discovering that humans will accept almost any horror if you wrap it in religious language and silk curtains. The mortification rooms, the sympathy chambers, the purification rituals, none of it was secret. None of it was hidden. It was right there in the center of European aristocratic life, documented, discussed, refined. And the most disturbing part isn't that it happened, it's that it worked. These people genuinely believed they were achieving something. They'd emerge from their suffering sessions feeling enlightened, purified, closer to the divine. The pain had become the point. The destruction of the body had become proof of the soul's strength. And when you build a system where hurting yourself makes you holy, where decay equals devotion, You don't just create individual madness. You create cultural madness. An entire civilization convincing itself that the path to God runs through a room with drainage channels carved into the floor.